We have been blessed by creation and community. The injustice of extractive relationships and systemic racism have fractured both. Let's Talk Rev is all about providing tools and access for communities to build power from the grassroots up for change at the policy level. Our guests are doing this in various ways. Sit back and enjoy this casual, spirited conversation with Rev. Today we have Daniel Tate with us. Daniel Tate is the Chief Operating Officer for Energy Alabama. Not only is Daniel Tate the Chief Operating Officer for Energy Alabama, Daniel Tate is also on the steering committee for Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. Daniel, we thank you for joining our team. I don't know if Marasia will be with us today, but we thank you for joining us. And I'll turn it over to Kyle to introduce himself, Abigail to introduce herself, and then I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Rev. So I'm Kyle Crider. I'm the Program and Policy Director for People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light.
All right, hey y'all, I'm Abigail Franks. I am the Programs and Outreach Coordinator for People's Justice Council, and I'm also the Programs Fellow for the Southeast Climate Energy Network.
Thank you. And Daniel Tate, we'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll start our conversation.
All right, I'm Daniel Tate with Energy Alabama, and I'm physically located in Huntsville, and we do work all over the state here with the organization. Our mission is to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy, so doing a lot of work on energy efficiency, helping people save energy. We do three kind of buckets of work. Ours are kind of broken down into education, so events like this, getting out there and talking to folks about energy efficiency and renewables, electric transportation, things like that. We also do a lot of advocacy and policy work. Here at Alabama, as with most things, it seems like we're 49th or 50th in almost everything, and this field is no different. So we got a lot of work to do to get Alabama moving on the right track here, and sometimes it's putting good policy, good laws on the books. Sometimes it's taking bad laws off the books. So we do a little bit of both of that. And then kind of the third bucket of work that we do, we call it technical assistance, but I guess I can say this in front of you, Rev. I always call it preaching the gospel. When I go out and preach the gospel about energy efficiency, renewable energy, things like that, eventually someone's going to raise their hand and say, that sounds great, Daniel. How do I do that? And, I can't just say, well, I'm glad you believe me now. Have fun. We try to help folks and get things done. A lot of times we're helping other nonprofit organizations, do efficiency projects or renewable projects on their buildings and their facilities. So, yeah, just trying to actually put steel in the ground, make things happen. So that's the work that we do here in the state.
Well, we certainly appreciate the work that you do. We thank you for the work that you do with us as well. Let me ask you, Daniel, looking at your journey and your life and you being in Alabama, how did you arrive to where you are today?
Well, I got involved in this work quite some time ago. I mean, for me, it's always been something that I've been interested in, just kind of more generally, sustainability writ large, but I never really knew it was something I could make a career of. Like every good Huntsvillian right out of college, I worked for the federal government. Seems like everybody here, right, works for the federal government or a federal government contractor, and I was no different. And around 2011 is when we, of course, had pretty bad tornado outbreak here in Alabama that was felt, from Tuscaloosa all the way up here. And we lost power for about 7 to 10 days, depending on where you were in North Alabama. Ironically, maybe not ironically, it was the same weekend I was supposed to get married. And so we, by the way, we went ahead and took our honeymoon anyways, because why stay here with no power? Might as well go to a Caribbean island. So we did that. But nonetheless, it got me kind of engaged in the community because, to be blunt, we really were exposed as a community to understand how unresilient we really were. that a natural disaster could knock our entire like multi-county economy down for a week, and there was nothing we could do about it. So there was an effort here locally to get better on efficiency, renewables, resiliency, and not sort of getting involved. And one thing turned to another, and I turned from a volunteer to opportunity for a career with a different nonprofit at the time called Nexus Energy Center, doing energy efficiency, weatherization work in the residential, the built environment, residential homes. And, I just kept doing it more and more. And eventually I co-founded Energy Alabama in 2014. And that was really out of the realization with Nexus, right, is that we were fixing homes, but people were building homes terribly faster than we could fix them. And I always knew that if we were really going to help people and really get ahead of this, we were going to have to deal with policy. We're going to have to actually get in there and say, here's the right way to build, here's the right way to do programs so we can actually help everybody. So yeah, we had a lot of work to do on that front.
I appreciate that. When we look at the landscape of Alabama, I have found in my experience that Alabama is woefully ignorant. And when I say that, I don't mean it derogatory, but I mean it in the truest sense. They just don't know enough about energy and energy burdens. The amount of weight that energy plays in their life, and for some that weight is oppressive, but we don't really understand the severity of that weight. Can you talk more about the landscape of Alabama when it comes down to energy, not just looking at the end user, but looking at the production thereof, and even the participation from our municipalities in that production, as well as the effects that it has on that end user?
Yeah, I can definitely try. So in Alabama, we pretty much have three different utility structures, kind of, in terms of the state from north to south. So in the northern part of the state, we have TVA, which is a federal utility that generates and sells power to a handful or two of local power companies. These are usually either electric cooperatives that are owned by the people. So they are supposedly democratic organizations that are supposed to respond to their members, or they're municipal utilities. So they're usually owned by the government, a city usually. And then we have Alabama Power, which is an investor-owned utility. And that investor-owned utility, of course, is private, and it's trying to maximize shareholder value and profit. And then in the southern third of the state, we have mostly electric cooperatives, and we have a different, what's called GNT, Generation Transmission Utility, called Power South. So it's a lot like TVA, but it's not a federal entity, it's a cooperative entity. So it's owned by other cooperatives. That's kind of the structure that we have. Now, in terms of, what you were talking about a little bit in your question, at least from our perspective at Energy Alabama, we kind of see, no matter which structure you're in, right, whether you're in TVA territory or whether you're in Alabama Power territory, there are a few things that seem to be at play. Number one is that all three of them have been, woefully their investments in energy efficiency have been woefully inadequate. And then that leads to high electricity and gas bills, right? So if regulators, if that could be city council members, it could be the TVA board, it could be the Alabama Public Service Commission, if you're an Alabama Power customer, if those folks aren't actually making sure the energy efficiency happens, you end up with folks that have really high bills. And of course, here in Alabama, I can't remember what the last statistic was, but we're 50th in energy efficiency. Birmingham has some of the highest energy burdens. We get the second highest electric bills. So we talk about that burden on folks, right? It's not just that there's a burden, but that burden is felt unequally, right? So if you have people, the reason, at least, partially from my perspective, that you never see much action is that folks who are doing all right today can afford, when the bill comes in, even if it's a little bit higher, to write the check, and they do that and they don't think about it again. But for a lot of Alabamians, as you mentioned the word oppressive, these bills are so high that people are having to make extremely difficult decisions about whether or not they keep the lights and the heat on in the middle of the winter, or whether or not they're going to put food on the table, or whether or not they're going to be able to buy medicine and all the other things that they need for their lives. And so, that's where the failure of our public policy really drives, kitchen table checkbook issues that just keeps our state's long history our long history in poverty mired in poverty. We can't break that cycle, right? If people are always, every dollar they get, just immediately sending something right back to the power company, that's not sustainable. Not just from, like, people think it's sustainable as an environmental sense. That's not sustainable for folks, right? Regular people. And we got to break that cycle.
Thank you. I want to let Abigail and Kyle jump in and ask questions. I don't want to manipulate or monopolize all of the time. Excuse me.
You don't want to pull a utility?
What's that?
You don't want to pull a utility?
Yeah, I don't want to manipulate. I don't want to monopolize all the time. So I want to give some opportunity for them to ask questions as well.
Well, I will start. Daniel, I know we had this conversation recently ourselves, but for the sake of the audience, historically, Energy Alabama has been seen as kind of Huntsville-centric, kind of TVA centric. But I know you really are a statewide organization and are looking to change not just the image, but your presence. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that perception existed because it was true. I'm from Huntsville. All of our board was originally from Huntsville, and we started, as a really small organization trying to grow ourselves out, from that area of the state. And that's what, slowly but surely we've started to do. So, we're actively trying to do events, like we're going to be doing a Drive Electric event on Earth Day in Birmingham, and trying to get out there at other areas of the state. I mean, depending on where you are in the state, like I mentioned before, with the 3 different structures, you may face some similar challenges, but the ways to solve those challenges may be very different, right? And so we have to be cognizant of the organization that, a lot of the fixes, if you will, that may work in Huntsville aren't the same for what's going to be able to fix, say, an energy burden issue in Birmingham. It's going to take, say, the Public Service Commission or a state legislature to act, whereas here at a municipal level, maybe you can do it with the city council. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be much more intentional about growing our membership, being active in events, growing our board, our representation geographically throughout the state as well. So we're trying to do a better job of that and really, be a voice for all of Alabama.
So that just brought up something that I've never even thought about. Like, I've been, passionate about energy efficiency and renewable energy for Alabama for a couple of years now. But now that you mentioned that we're kind of divided into 3 different, sectors, I guess you could say, with TVA, Alabama Power, and Power South, I haven't even heard of them, which kind of proves that a lot of us are kind of ignorant, But so with that in mind, do you think we need different solutions to make Alabama more energy efficient, depending on the area of Alabama? What do you think?
It can be. A lot of times it's really just a different pathway to making them happen. And so to describe that, or to try to put some description around that, let's take an energy efficiency program, for instance. If you live in Alabama Power Territory and say you want to do a low income energy efficiency program to try to, fix or address some of this burden issue, that has to be approved by the Alabama Public Service Commission, or the state legislature has to effectively either force or overrule the Public Service Commission into doing something. That's a big lift, right? Because you're talking about statewide elections, you're talking about a lot of people that you have to convince to do something that may not even represent Alabama Power Territory, right? So people in Dothan or Huntsville have to now vote on something that doesn't really affect them, and they may not be as engaged. If you live up here where I do in the Tennessee Valley Authority area, and there's some other municipal utilities in the other parts of the state, but a municipal utility, it's much more local. If I want to run an energy efficiency program, then I have to convince like a local utility board or maybe just a city council, which may be only 3 or 5 people, right? So you have a much more manageable power structure, if you will, in order to make real tangible change. Now, keep in mind, those are much smaller utilities too. So if we get something successful in Huntsville, we may help a lot of people in Madison County, but we're missing a lot of work that needs to be done in all the rest of the state. In the case of electric cooperatives, the program, again, may be the exact same in terms of what it does for the end user, the person, but to get it approved would have to take the board of directors, which are democratically elected. So you'd have to have, people on the board of directors who believe and want to do the good work of energy efficiency and renewables, or you've got to run good candidates for the board of directors in those counties that a cooperative serves and replace them and put people who are actually going to represent the interests of the people on the ground. So again, that's, manageable and it's smaller, but it can be done, right? So it's just, a different strategy, if you will, for kind of where you might be just to get the same thing done. It could be the exact same program, but, you get there a different way.
So I'm definitely going to show my ignorance here, but I'm still learning about how electric cooperatives work. Are they kind of like, and not only like how they work, but how we can, democratically shift them and maybe like lead to policy change? Are they kind of like people that work under the umbrella of these major power sectors like TVA, Alabama Power, and Power South, or are they separate?
It depends. So there are 2 main types of utilities independent of like cooperative world. One is a G&T. So those are generation and transmission. These are like the Power South and TVAs of the world. They're the ones that they own most of the power plants, and they transmit it to the second type of utility called a distribution utility. And when we say electric cooperative, we're usually in our heads thinking about the distribution level, someone that most people pay their bills to. We all pay our bills to a distribution level utility. Someone like Alabama Power is called vertically integrated, which means they have both of those. They are both a G&T and a retail distribution utility. So they own the power plant, they own the lines, and they sell it direct to end use customers. I'm in TVA world, but I don't pay a bill to TVA. I pay a bill to Huntsville Utilities, who buys its energy from TVA. So in terms of the way that, electric cooperatives work, they are, usually distribution utilities that buy from some other G&T. The cooperatives up here buy from TVA. Cooperatives in the southern part of Alabama, most of them buy from Power South. You could have a cooperative that buys from Alabama Power. You can have a cooperative that owns its own. They all exist in different areas of the country. But usually when we think of cooperatives, we're thinking of that distribution level, like where do people pay their bills? And that's really where you're trying to affect usually the most change.
You would think that having eliminated middleman, so to speak, would allow for better benefits for the end user. But that's just not the case. TVA tends to treat their end users much better than Alabama Power does, or that, at least that's what it seems like. I don't live in TVA territory. I just get the news from groups like you about TVA's interactions with the public, and I have to say, I don't experience them as bad as I do with Alabama Power. And it's weird that cutting out that middleman doesn't protect the people better. It actually gives them license to just be even more oppressive, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way I know to try to break that dynamic down is that while it may sound like there are economies of scale to be gained there, and there probably are somewhere, they definitely never reach the end user, right? If they do exist, they're delivering value and benefit to shareholders, not to people like, all of us on this call, regular folks that are trying to buy electricity from the power company. You have to think about like TVA has a long history, and it's gone through periods where it's been very progressive, and it's gone through periods like most recently here where it's trying to be much more like Alabama Power. So it waxes and wanes itself. And, but for all of its faults, it's a different structure, right? It's public power. It is more responsive usually to the people because it's owned by the people, in this case, the federal government. Whereas in the case of investor-owned utilities or someone like Alabama Power, they have to sell a service and they're out to make a profit, and they have different stakeholders than the general public. That might be part of their stakeholders. Obviously, they don't want like a revolt of the people on the streets of Birmingham who are, carrying pitchforks and torches. That would be bad, right, for their company and stuff. But they also have really powerful and important stakeholders on Wall Street they have to service as well. And that's where I think you see that the vertical integration does not necessarily deliver value to the folks in the folks in the regular folks of, say, Birmingham or Mobile. And that, to me, that's a big difference. Just who do they answer to, right?
Right.
And the answer to that makes pretty clear where their values will lie.
Right. Agreed.
While we have our energy policy expert, I'd love to have a really wonky conversation about something like decoupling. But I guess in terms of importance, I know something Rev and I both want to hear you elaborate on, because you've been so generous to dedicate a whole intern to this, is we are all working on an energy scorecard, and would love to have you tell our audience more about that and how this tool can help reform co-ops, munis, and the big guys, the power players.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked a little bit about the ways that electric cooperatives are governed, right? And kind of how they have to answer, at least in theory right now, to their regular members who actually technically own the cooperative, right? But we also talked earlier about how a lot of folks, through no fault of their own, are just busy with their day-to-day lives, or don't know what to do. They're ignorant of what the problems are. And even if they may feel the effects of the problem, like a really high bill they can't pay, they don't know the systemic issues that are behind that problem or how to fix them, right? They just see an effect on them and their family. And so what we're really trying to do here with the scorecard is break down a lot of the major issues that we see usually crop up with cooperatives. So these are issues over governance and independence. These are issues over investments in energy efficiency and renewable energy, engagement, and customer rights. So like, if the customers own the cooperative, how much power are they really given? Have the organizations been structured in such a way to give them kind of nominal control on paper, but in practice, they really have no power? And, so there's a lot of issues like that around electric cooperatives. And with this scorecard, we're, going cooperative by cooperative in the state of Alabama to score them on a variety of these different metrics to say, how good are they on energy efficiency and renewable energy? How good are they on having appropriate governance structures that are responsive to the people that own the cooperative, the local folks? And with this, we hope to A, raise awareness of the more systemic issues, B, help outline some pathways to change, because really in that pathway to change that we're talking about, if we can identify these issues, the pathways to change in a cooperative are much more simple, right? Regular folks are the ones who make up the board of directors, and regular folks are the ones who own the cooperative. So let's put folks on the board of directors who are going to actually make these changes. And that's what we're, from our perspective, Energy Alabama are really trying to do is see where the issues are. And I am assuming, although we're not finished with our scorecard yet, we will see common issues pop up across a variety of electric cooperatives that all of us in our community and all of the regular folks can point to and say, aha, here is one big issue that exists across practically all electric cooperatives. We know we need to enact reforms on this because it could affect hundreds of thousands of Alabamians for the better. Let's go do that. But without the scorecard, it's a lot of anecdote or things that we think may be happening, but we want to put some real data and analysis behind it.
Wait, Brother Tate, I appreciate that, and I can say and help. Hopefully, you can help back me up. One of the things that I'm pretty sure we'll find is that energy efficiency and weatherization is woefully lacking here in the state as a whole, regardless of what utility. And so that tends to me to point to a state issue. And in particular, looking at our legislators and protecting the people. Not just protecting the people, but we also know that through weatherization and energy efficiency, you're also protecting the planet. I'm wondering, knowing that Alabama has some of the lowest energy rates while paying some of the highest utility bills. I'm wondering, what has been your field for a weatherization program here in the state?
Well, there's a federal weatherization program that exists already, and the way that works or has historically worked in Alabama is, the federal government gives money to the state, which in our case is the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs, known as ADECA. And that agency, gives out grants normally to local agencies like a community action agency. And that local agency is the one that's responsible for doing weatherization on, income qualified homes. But we have, again, so many issues, right? We have renters, we have mobile homes, we have people who don't own, we have slumlords. You just have so many different issues that weatherization either can't fix on its own or is inadequate by itself to solve. Not to mention the fact that even if weatherization was the end all be all, it's never really been funded at the level over a long period of time to actually address even the issues it was created to address. I mean, the way I got my start in the industry, right, was basically that. It was weatherization back in the 2009 through 2011 stimulus funding, well over a decade ago now. And basically at that point in time, there was a huge plus up to the stimulus of weatherization. So the state agencies across the country got a lot more money, and we were able to weatherize a lot more homes. Furthermore, there was additional funding available for non-state-based agencies. So that's how I was working, right? That we were a nonprofit organization where we were accessing some of those new funds and running some of our own programs and trying some different things that maybe the state hadn't tried before, or we could partner with other cities across the Southeast to learn from. So in terms of, where do I think it needs to go? I think number one, you need a massive investment in weatherization, period. We have never had money at the state level in weatherization, or at least very little. Most of it has always come from federal funding. So that means that we need a huge plus of federal funding, which is something we should all be advocating for to our federal legislators, state and House. Second is that we need the state to take action. And those are things like state legislation. So you see in other states, there can be energy efficiency, what are called portfolio standards, which force utilities, because let's be honest, if they sell a product of kilowatt hours of energy to you, they don't want to sell less, they want to sell more. And under the current structure we have, they're always going to try to sell more unless we as a legislature or as a regulator, in our case, the Public Service Commission, right, actually makes them do otherwise. And so you can do that. I think that we need both a federal pot, we need state pot. We also need very specific programs that are dedicated to low income energy efficiency that really try to hit specific populations and types of buildings that are often neglected or overlooked, right? Again, I mentioned some of them earlier. A lot of the people that are experiencing the highest energy burdens in the state don't own their own home. And weatherization can help renters. It is available for renters, but the landlord has to pay 75% of the money, or at least 25%, and then the federal government will pay 75%.
But if slumlords aren't going to pay 1%, so what do we do about renters? What do we do about mobile homes? What do we do about people that are in multifamily that is still unaffordable to operate? Those are going to take, much more aggressive and new types of programs, which have been done, right? And we have states like even Georgia is piloting something called Pay As You Save, very innovative and trying to get more folks access to this. South Carolina has done some stuff on this front. This is nothing that other states haven't seen. It's just that our state, even compared to some of our southern neighbors, has just decided to act like it doesn't exist and chosen not to try to address the problem. And that's what we got to fix through a variety of programs and funding streams.
But, Daniel, for Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, we have started We Rise, which is weatherizing every resident in the Southeast. And we're looking at We Rise Alabama, where we're asking and encouraging communities of faith to get involved in the whole weatherization movement. And so the 25% that needs to be paid, I can see communities of faith kicking in and helping to pay that 25% to ensure that those homes still are weatherized. Because regardless of who owns that home, there's a family that's living in that home that's hurting because of utility. And so for me, I don't have time to get caught up in the diplomacy of this, because for me, the urgency is too great. If my house is on fire, I don't care who put the fire out. I just want the fire to go out. I don't have time to route, if the fire truck gonna come up, if the ambulance, somebody with a hose and some water put this fire out. And so for me, communities of faith have an opportunity to put the fire out on a lot of this hurt when it comes down to weatherization. And then we can force the government's hand to do more. Regardless of who owns that home, not only is a family living outside of it, it's on a planet that's being destroyed by the greenhouse gases that are emitted from this. Yep. So despite who owns it, and despite who might even benefit from it, it's got to get done.
That's exactly right.
Because this is a planetary solution.
That's right. It's going to help everybody, even if you don't live in Alabama, but it's especially going to help the folks, like you said, that are living there, even if they don't own it. Who's paying the utility bill? The landlord who doesn't live in Alabama? No.
You're right.
There, and they're the ones that, sure, maybe the property value goes up a little bit and the landlord might benefit from doing nothing, but frankly, I don't care. I want the people to actually have a bill that is manageable, their family can pay and have access to, renewable energy, or just get them access to heat. We got people in Alabama that are having to make those hard decisions. We don't have time to quibble over that.
Yeah.
And honestly, the more you let people save their money that they don't have to spend on these utility bills, the more they're going to put into their local economies.
Oh, that's right. I mean, just this is part of what gets me so worked up, right? Is that even if you thought nothing about the environment, or even if you thought nothing about the people who actually live in that house, okay, which effectively is the policy that we have been operating on for a long time, right? We don't care about the people who live in that house. We don't care about what the effect is on the rest of the environment and the rest of the people. But even if you don't care about any of that, if you care about just raw economics, energy efficiency is the way to go. Why do you think that we went after a massive plus up of weatherization funding in the last stimulus? Because energy efficiency is work that is inherently manual. So that means people in that community have to do it, right? That means that's jobs and economic opportunity that have to be created in that community, in those homes. And data has shown us well over a decade now that for every $1 million invested, there is no other industry that can create more jobs per $1 million in energy efficiency. So if I care nothing but about growing Alabama's economy, I should want to invest in energy efficiency tenfold than what we're doing right now. Not to mention, again, that we might actually help somebody in the process or reduce our emissions. So sorry, I get a little worked up about that because to me, it just does not make any sense that we as a state who tells us, right, that we tell the world that we're going to have the most business friendly and economically prosperous state in the country, right? That's kind of what we tell ourselves. And if that were true, we would be doing the investments that actually make that happen at a faster clip than anything else. But those we ignore, right? And that gets me fired up.
Yeah, I just don't understand why we're so afraid to pay the upfront cost if it's going to save us a lot of money. I don't get it, but whatever.
It feels like to me we're addicted to short-term gain, and we can't see past short-term gain, which is problematic and created this entire issue that we have, which is our climate crisis that we're in. One last question, Daniel. Where do we go from here? Knowing what you know, what should our listeners know in getting involved?
Yeah, I think, the most important thing, at least from like an energy policy related type of frame, is know who's making the decisions about where and how you get your energy, right? So back to the very first part of our conversation, if folks are living on and getting their energy from a municipal utility, what they do is going to be very different than, say, someone who gets power from Alabama Power. So first, know who your provider and kind of the way they're structured so that you know where to go, right? Second, and I have to do this because otherwise I think my board of directors might beat me up otherwise, is get connected with groups like Energy Alabama, like Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. There are groups in your community, or we can help connect you with folks that will know, like, okay, if I'm in Mobile, here are the things that we need to do to change the structure in Mobile. Here are the things we need to do in Tuscaloosa or Huntsville, wherever I'm at. Because I think that, number one, there's power in numbers. Number two, you have organizations that have dedicated their time, staff, effort, money to understanding these issues and helping people. And we can all achieve an economy of scale that way. So know who's doing your service, who you get your electric and gas from if you have gas. Get connected in your local community, and then those organizations like Alabama Interfaith Power and Light or Energy Alabama will be able to give you tangible next steps. Like we have, for instance, a very specific ask at the local level, things that we want individual cities to do. So if you're a resident of the city of Birmingham, we can help you know exactly what it is you should be asking your council and your mayor to do. And if you're connected with Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, right, you're going to be able to know, hey, here's how I help my house of worship get involved in these programs, how I can actually get my hands dirty and making some of these upgrades on homes, helping to secure funds for that. So there's just a variety of ways. You're not going to know all of them until you kind of get connected with the community organizations that are helping make it happen. So it don't have to be Energy Alabama. I just want you to get involved with somebody out there who is trying to help make this problem better, and add your voice, add your muscle, your financial contributions if you're able. But if not, more than anything, your time and your effort to make it happen, because it's not going to happen unless we got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Alabamians out there that are pushing this, that are making this happen. If it's just Daniel, Michael, Kyle, and Abigail, we're not going to make it happen, right? We need lots of regular folks that are going to get out there and say, this is not good enough anymore, and we demand change.
I appreciate it. I love that you hit on collective activism, or collective advocacy, I should say. I do want to, this is it. We come down to the end, and so we're getting ready to close out. And you did just give us what could be your closing words, but I do want to offer you an opportunity to give closing thoughts if you'd like.
I think the main thing for me that I would close with is that, and I'm going to steal this from this guy I knew one time. I think his name was Reverend Michael Malcolm, and he told me that I needed that we all should, and that really stuck with me. We need to center folks. We need to center regular people, right? Is that regardless of where we're coming from, the structure, our utility, who we're trying to influence, we need to be thinking about what can I do? What policies can I advocate for that center regular people and helping them as much as possible? If we solve that problem first, we will inherently save energy. We will reduce emissions. We will make our planet more sustainable. We will make our economy more sustainable. We will make folks' lives better. So let's center that first. I think there was a reverend one time who told me something like that. So I think that I'll pass along those words of wisdom.
Hey, listen, if you ever run back into that cat, you make sure you pay him for that. Yeah.
I tell you what, he might need something for that.
Listen, man, I appreciate you. I appreciate your thoughtfulness, and I also appreciate your friendship. Thank you for being a friend to Alabama Interfaith Power and Light, and a personal friend to us.
Indeed.
And we look forward to continuing to work with you. Listen, as always, I offer to you love, peace, and light. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you.